D. Docs present Wonder number 24, the complete story of Henry Danger, how one superhero sitcom became Nickelodeon's last great phenomenon. Black silence then, the distant ding of an old service elevator. Metal gears begin turning somewhere beneath the floor. Hydraulic pistons hiss. The elevator slowly descends into darkness. A computerized voice calmly announces access granted. Massive steel doors slide open. Electric lights flicker to life, one section at a time. Rows of impossible inventions stretch into the distance. A giant computer monitor hums awake. A transparent elevator tube races through the room, and then a booming voice echoes through the cavern. Kid, you're late. For just a second, you're 12 years old again. School is finally over. Your backpack is lying somewhere near the front door. Homework can wait because Nickelodeon is on, and somewhere beneath just an ordinary junk shop, the world's most unusual after school job is about to begin. Look, let's keep it real right out of the gate. This is one of my favorite shows ever. When people talk about Nickelodeon's biggest live action shows, the same names almost come up first: iCarly, Drake and Josh, Victorious. Maybe Zoe 101. These shows deserve every ounce of praise they receive. They helped define an entire generation, but after those giants came to an end, Nickelodeon faced one of the defining creative challenges of its modern live action era. It didn't just need another sitcom, it needed another world. A place kids wanted to visit every single week. A place filled with ridiculous gadgets, impossible technology, over the top villains, and characters who somehow felt like your closest friends. The answer arrived in 2014, not inside a famous performing arts school, not inside a web studio, not inside an apartment building, but beneath a junk shop, hidden underneath an ordinary city inside a place called the Man Cave. It wasn't just another sitcom, it was one of Nickelodeon's boldest live action experiments of the superhero era. And there is always more to the story. Before Henry Hart ever stepped into the man cave, before Captain Man shouted another ridiculous one-liner, before Jasper accidentally stumbled into another life-threatening situation, Nickelodeon was standing at a crossroads. For nearly a decade, the network had dominated live-action children's television. Its sitcoms weren't simply popular, they became cultural landmarks. Kids didn't just watch them, they quoted them. They recreated them on playgrounds. They argued over them at lunch. They rushed home after school. Missing an episode meant showing up the next day completely out of the conversation. But television was changing. Streaming was beginning to reshape how audience watched. YouTube creators were beginning to become celebrities. Superheroes were rapidly becoming the biggest force in entertainment. The world that had embraced webcast and iCarly was now obsessed with masks, gadgets, secret identities, and cinematic universes. Nickelodeon understood something important. If the next flagship sitcom was going to capture a new generation, it couldn't simply initiate the past, or imitate the past, I should say. It had to speak the language of the present. That meant finding a concept that felt familiar enough to be comforting, yet ambitious enough to feel entirely new. The solution wasn't another school, it wasn't another family, it wasn't another group of friends. It was something the network had rarely attempted on this scale: a genuine superhero comedy. Not a parody, not an animated adventure, a live action sitcom built around secret identities, comic book gadgets, elaborate action sequences, and enough slapstick to remind you that this was still unmistakably Nickelodeon. At the center of it all stood an unlikely pair. One was the city's legendary protector, confident, reckless, completely indestructible. The other was just a regular teenager looking for a part time job. No destiny, no prophecy, no radioactive spider, just a kid answering a help wanted sign. Now, the simple decision cha- changed everything. That simple decision changed everything because Henry Hart didn't become Kid Danger because he was chosen by fate. He didn't become a hero because he said yes. And that choice became he became a hero because he said yes, and that choice became one of the smartest creative decisions Nickelodeon had ever made in years. Had made in years, I should say. Instead of telling children that heroes are born extraordinarily, Henry Danger quietly suggested something different. Maybe heroes start completely ordinary. Maybe courage isn't something you discover during a world-ending battle. Maybe it begins with showing up, learning, making mistakes, and finding someone willing to believe you can become more than you thought possible. That idea gave Henry Danger something bigger than gadgets, bigger than laser beams, bigger than superhero costumes. I'd say it gave the series a heart, and once the world of Swellview was built around that idea, there was no turning back. The city had found its newest hero, the audience had found its newest obsession, and Nickelodeon had found its next phenomenon. Now, every great television world requires a blueprint, and behind the neon lights, impossible gadgets, and soaring superhero action of Swellview was a deliberate collaboration. Henry Danger was created by Dan Schneider and Dana Olsen, two writers deeply attuned to the rhythmic, high energy styles of children television comedy. When Nickelodeon officially ordered the series in 2014, the immediate challenge was finding the right actors to anchor a premise that could easily have collapsed under its own absurdity. The casting process eventually led to Jace Norman with an approachable charm and instinctive comedic timing. Norman stepped onto the role of Henry Hart, grounding the chaotic superhero world with a genuine teenage vulnerability. Opposite him stood Cooper Barnes as Ray Manchester, Captain Man. Barnes brought a theatrical, larger than life energy to the screen, balancing indestructible invulnerability with a total lack of emotional maturity. Around them, a distinctive ensemble took shape. Riley Downs brought razor sharp wit and tactical brilliance as Charlotte. Sean Ryan Fox added unpredictable comedy chaos as Jasper. Ella Anderson evolved Piper from an endless, suspicious sibling into a comedic force. And Michael D. Cohen brought eccentric genius to life as Schwoz. Behind the camera, the production leadership evolved to meet the demands of a growing multi-season run, with writer and producer Christopher J. Nowak eventually becoming showrunner for the fifth season. In 2028, Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider entered their long-running partnership. Their public statement described the separation as a mutual decision to pursue new opportunities, while reporting surrounding his departure also raised questions about workplace conduct. But Henry Danger continued. Under new creative leadership, the series completed its fifth and final season, proving that Swellview had grown beyond any single creator. The machine was built, the cast was locked in, and now it was time to explore the city they called home. Swellview. Now, every great fictional world has one thing in common. It feels like it exists even when the cameras stop rolling. Gotham had Batman, Springfield had The Simpsons, Hollywood Arts had aspiring performers, and Swellview had absolutely no business making as much sense as it somehow did. On paper, the city was ridiculous. Its greatest superhero couldn't feel pain. The villains had names that sounded like rejected breakfast cereals, if we're being honest. Its most advanced headquarters was hidden beneath a junk shop that somehow never attracted suspicion. Its mayor made questionable decisions. Its citizens accepted chaos as part of daily life, and somehow it all worked. Because the world wasn't built around realism, it was built around consistency. Once you accepted Swellview's rules, everything inside it felt completely natural. At the center of the universe stood Captain Man Ray Manchester. Wasn't the polished, brooding superhero dominating movie theaters during the 2010s. He was haunted by tragedy. He wasn't obsessed with visions. He wasn't saving the world because destiny demanded it. He was loud, immature, overconfident, completely fearless. And because of an experimental procedure that left him indestructible, completely incapable of feeling physical pain. That single idea transformed nearly every action scene into comedy. Where most superheroes avoided getting hit, Captain Man particularly treated explosions like mild inconveniences. Cars would crash into him, buildings could collapse around him, villains could throw everything they had at him, and they did. His biggest concern usually wasn't surviving, it was whether someone had scratched his boots. Then there was Henry Hart, the audience's way into this unbelievable world. Unlike Ray, Henry still felt every punch, every mistake, every consequence. He wasn't trying to become famous. He wasn't chasing glory. He was trying to balance algebra homework, family dinners, friendship, and the world's strangest after work job. That tension became the emotional engine of the entire series. Every lie told to protect his secret identity came with a cost. Every excuse created another problem. Every victory demanded another sacrifice. For all its outrageous comedy, Henry Danger understood one timeless superhero truth. The hardest part wasn't fighting the villains. It was protecting the people you loved from the truth. Surrounding them was one of Nickelodeon's strongest supporting cast. Charlotte became the team strategist, the calm voice of reason inside a headquarters overflowing with chaos. Jasper somehow stumbled into danger with almost supernatural consistency. His confidence dramatically overweighed his awareness. Piper Hart evolved from Henry's endless, suspicious little sister to one of the show's funniest and most unpredictable characters. Schwoz wasn't simply an inventor. He was the wonderfully eccentric genius responsible for keeping the impossible functioning. Without him, the man cave was just a basement full of broken gadgets. Together, these characters transformed Swellview from a superhero settling into a living, breathing sitcom world. Then there was the man cave itself. It wasn't just a headquarters, it was the dream. Hidden elevators, secret tunnels, high speed transport tubes, advanced computers, training simulators, vehicles, weapons, experimental inventions. To a generation of kids, it felt like the coolest room on television. Every episode found another excuse to reveal a new gadget, another impossible machine, another ridiculous invention. Now, the man cave wasn't simply where stories happened, it was where imagination moved in because every kid watching secretly wondered the same thing. What if the elevator really existed? What if superheroes were hiding beneath my neighborhood? What if an ordinary after school job could change my entire life? This is what made Swellview unforgettable. It wasn't a city you believed was real, it was a city you wished was real. And once you wanted to live there, I would say Nickelodeon had already won. Truly. Because I know for a fact, I still would want to live there. A great television show isn't remembered simply because people watched it. It's remembered because it understood exactly who it was. Henry Danger never tried to become the darkest superhero story on television. It never tried to compete with blockbuster movies. It never chased gritty realism. Instead, it asked a much more interesting question. What if saving the world felt like an after school activity? That single idea changed every single thing. Unlike the superheroes dominating movie theaters during the 2010s, Henry still had homework. He still had parents asking where he'd been. He still had friends wondering why he kept disappearing. Suspicious, right? He still had to make it home before dinner. The series understood that. For its audience, balancing ordinary life with extraordinary responsibility was more relatable than saving the entire planet. Truly. That balance became the show's greatest strength. Every episode bounced effortlessly between superhero spectacle and sitcom absurdity. 1 minute Captain Man was battling a bizarre supervillain with an equally bizarre plan. The next Henry was desperately trying to explain why he'd missed another family event. Neither story ever overshadowed the other. They depended on each other, actually. Then there was the comedy. Physical comedy had always been part of Nickelodeon's DNA. People slipped, people crashed through walls, people got covered in slime. It's Nickelodeon. Henry Danger took that tradition and wrapped it into a superhero costume. Captain's Man invulnerability transformed pain into punchlines. Every explosion, every flying object, every catastrophic accident, instead of ending the action, it usually became the joke. The villains understood that rhythm too. Swellview wasn't filled with terrifying criminal masterminds. It was populated by gloriously eccentric troublemakers whose ridiculous personalities were often just as memorable as their schemes. The show embraced the comic book tradition of colorful rogues while filtering it through Nickelodeon's unmistakably playful sense of humor. But underneath every gadget, every laser, every explosion, every exploding invention, and every ridiculous villain was a relationship that carried the entire series. Henry and Ray, on the surface, they look like the classic mentor and apprentice. They experience the experienced veteran and the eager newcomer, but over time, something more interesting happened. Their relationship slowly evolved into something resembling family. Ray wasn't perfect, far from it, but he could be impulsive and immature, self centered, completely unreasonable. But when Henry needed him, he showed up. Henry wasn't just learning how to fight crime, he was learning how to carry responsibility. And Ray, whether he admitted it or not, was learning how to become responsible for someone else. Now, that emotional evolution gave this series a surprising depth. Gave it surprising depth, I should say. Depth. Because beneath all the explosions and superhero gadgets, Henry Danger wasn't really about powers. It was about growing up, about earning trust, about making impossible choices, about discovering that becoming a hero rarely happened all at once. It happens one decision at a time. That emotional foundation is why audiences kept coming back. The gadgets were exciting, the villains were hilarious, okay? The man cave was unforgettable, but the characters made Swellview feel like home. And once a television world begins to feel like home, stops being just another show. It becomes part of childhood. Truly. It truly does. Now, television history is filled with shows that had brilliant ideas. Far fewer become genuine phenomena. Henry Danger did both. When the series premiered on July 26, 2014, nobody could have predicted just how long its secret identity would remain one of Nickelodeon's biggest assets. Week after week, season after season, the audience kept showing up. Children didn't simply like Henry Hart, they wanted to be Henry Hart. Because unlike so many superheroes, Henry wasn't born extraordinary. He wasn't chosen by destiny. He wasn't the smartest person in the room. He wasn't the strongest. He was just a kid who accepted an opportunity most people would never believe was real. That made the fantasy feel surprisingly attainable. The series also understood something that children's television had always relied upon. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates comfort. Every episode welcomed viewers back into a world they already understood. The elevator, the junk shop, the man cave, the tube system. Captain Man's becoming or booming confidence, I should say. Schwoz is inventing something that probably should never exist. Charlotte trying to keep everyone focused. Jasper accidentally making everything worse. Piper somehow becoming the loudest person in every room. Those weren't just reoccurring jokes, they became rituals. The audience knew exactly what kind of adventure they were about to experience, and they couldn't wait for it to begin. As the years passed, Henry Danger quietly accomplished something increasingly rare in children's television. It stayed relevant. Instead of burning brightly for a season or two before fading away, the show continued growing alongside its audience. Its characters matured, its relationships deepened, its mythology expanded, its stakes gradually became larger without abandoning the comedy that made viewers fall in love with the series in the first place. By then, Swellview wasn't just another fictional city, it had become one of Nickelodeon's most recognizable television worlds. The franchise grew beyond a single sitcom. Special events, crossovers, games, merchandise, international audiences, and eventually it became the defining live action anchor of Nickelodeon's late 2010s era. Nothing lasts forever. Not the biggest movies, not the biggest musicians, and not even the television worlds that once felt permanent. By the end of the 2010s, the entertainment landscape was changing again. Streaming wasn't just another way to watch television anymore. It was becoming the way millions of families watched everything. Kids no longer planned their afternoons around a network schedule. Entire seasons could be watched in a weekend. Algorithms slowly replaced television guides. The shared rhythm of after school programming began to fade, yet Henry Danger endured. Season after season, it remained one of Nickelodeon's defining series. It outlived many of its contemporaries. It introduced new viewers to Swellview while longtime fans watched Henry grow from an awkward teenager to taking a strange part time job into a confident young hero ready to stand on his own. Then, after 5 seasons, the mission came to an end. On March 21st, 2020, not with cancellation in the middle of a story, not with unanswered questions, but with the finale, the fate of danger that allowed the characters to move forward. Henry's journey had never been about staying Kid Danger forever. It had always been about becoming the kind of person who no longer needed someone else to tell him what a hero looked like. That's a surprisingly mature ending for a children's sitcom because growing up has never meant holding on to childhood forever. It means taking everything childhood gave you and carrying it into whatever comes next. For Nickelodeon, the finale marked something larger than the end of a successful series. It marked the closing chapter of an era. For years, the network had been defined by live action worlds that kids rushed home to visit. The bedrooms of Seattle, the halls of Hollywood Arts, and the apartments of San Diego, and beneath a junk shop in Swellview. Each generation had its place, its cast, its inside jokes, its unforgettable headquarters. Henry Danger became, for many viewers, a final great destination in that long tradition, not because no live action show would come afterwards. They did, but because very few would capture the same combination of longevity, cultural presence, and weekly anticipation that had defined Nickelodeon's biggest sitcoms for decades. The elevator doors eventually closed, the alarm stopped ringing, the gadgets powered down, but the world beneath the ordinary junk shop never really disappeared because Nickelodeon sets can be turned off, childhood memories can't. And that is why the story of Henry Danger didn't end with the credits when the credits rolled, because just 1 week after Henry Hart's original mission came to an end, the doors to Swellview opened again. The sidekick may have left, but the universe he helped build was only beginning to expand. By this point, Henry Danger was no longer simply a successful television show. It had become the foundation of something larger, a universe. The expansion began while the original series was still on the air. In 2018, Nickelodeon introduced The Adventures of Kid Danger, an animated spin-off that translated the exaggerated physics, eccentric villains, and impossible technology of Swellview into a format where almost anything could happen. The animated series was brief, but its existence revealed something important. Nickelodeon no longer viewed Henry Danger as a single sitcom. It viewed Swellview as a franchise. And as Henry Hart's original journey approached its conclusion, the network prepared for that world to continue without him at its center. Danger Force premiered on March 28th, 2020. Captain Man remained. Schwoz remained. The Man Cave remained. But the structure changed. Instead of training one ordinary teenager to become a sidekick, Ray and Schwoz were now responsible for a new generation of young heroes. Choppa, Miles, Mika, and Bose. Each possessed abilities they couldn't barely control, and together they proved that Swellview had become larger than the story that created it. That is the true test of a fictional universe. Can its world survive when the original protagonist walks away? For several more years, the answer was yes. But even after Dangerverse reached its conclusion, Henry Hart's story still wasn't finished. In January 2025, nearly 5 years after the original series finale, Jace Norman returned in Henry Danger, the movie, which premiered on Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus on January 17th, 2025. Henry was older, more experienced, no longer simply the teenage sidekick standing beside Captain Man. He had become the hero at the center of his own adventure. The film pushed the franchise beyond the familiar streets of Swellview and into alternate realities, introducing Henry's new superfan sidekick, Missy Martin, while reuniting him with Jasper, Piper, Schwoz, and Frankini. But beneath the larger scale, the emotional idea remained the same. Henry Hart had once accepted an impossible part-time job because he wanted the opportunity to become something greater. Years later, he was still learning what that decision required of him. The movie did more than revive an old Nickelodeon property. It demonstrated that the audience had have never completely left Swellview behind. Children who watched Henry's first elevator ride go down get older. The television landscape had transformed. Nickelodeon itself had changed, yet the doors to the man cave could still open and people still willing to step inside. Henry Danger had successfully crossed one of the entertainment's most difficult boundaries. It had moved from current television into nostalgia and then back into an active franchise. Now, when you step back and look at the full story of Henry Danger, you realize it accomplished something very few children television shows ever do. It successfully arrived after Giants, and somehow it became one itself. That is far more difficult than it sounds. Following a cultural phenomenon is one challenge. Convincing an entirely new generation that your world is where they belong is another. Henry Danger did exactly that. It understood that every generation deserves its own mythology. For one group of kids, that mythology was a web show filmed in a Seattle loft. For another, it was a performing arts high school in Hollywood. For millions growing up during the 2010s, it was a superhero headquarters hidden beneath the floor of a junk shop. The world became part of their childhood vocabulary. That world did. The Man Cave, Kid Danger, Captain Man, Schwoz, Charlotte, Jasper, Piper, Swellview. These weren't simply characters anymore, they became shared memories. The show's influence stretched beyond its own episodes. It proved that superhero stories didn't always need billion-dollar budgets or world-ending stakes to matter. Sometimes the biggest adventure was figuring out how to finish your homework after saving the city. Sometimes the greatest superpower wasn't flying. It was showing up again and again and again. That's why Henry Danger continues to find new audiences. Children who weren't even born when the series premiered now discover Swellview through streaming. Older fans who watched the original run now introduce Swellview to younger siblings, relatives, and a new generation of viewers. The jokes still land, the friendships still feel genuine, the action still feels exciting, and the heart of the series still beats just as loudly. That's the mark of a lasting television world. It doesn't survive because people remembered every episode. It survives because people remember how it made them feel. For one generation, Henry Danger wasn't just another Nickelodeon sitcom. It was the after school adventure they couldn't wait to return to, the place where ordinary life and impossible imagination met somewhere in the middle. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy any children's series can hope for. Not becoming the biggest show, not becoming the longest running show, but becoming the show that quietly takes up permanent residence in someone's childhood. Because years from now, most people won't remember every villain or every gadget or every joke, but they'll remember the feeling of hearing that elevator descend, watching those giant steel doors open, and wondering, what if there really was a secret world hiding just beneath our feet? Now, somewhere, an old service elevator is still making its show descent beneath a quiet junk shop. The lights of the man cave are still flickering to life. Captain Man is still calling for his sidekick. Schwoz is still building something that probably shouldn't exist. Charlotte is trying to keep everyone on track. Jasper is still accidentally making things worse. Piper is still louder than everyone else in the room, and somewhere a teenager is still stepping into a black and blue suit for the very first time. Not because becoming a superhero was ever the point. The point was that for 30 minutes after school, every day, an ordinary kid reminded us that extraordinary things can begin with one unexpected opportunity. That courage isn't something you're born with, it's something that you choose. It's something you choose, one decision, mistake, one act of kindness, one day at a time. The elevator doors may have closed, but childhood never really leaves the places that helped shape it. Headline fades, culture lasts, and there is always more to the story.